Yeah, we should be good.
Okay, awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to Youth Voices and Justice. My name is Leah Diab-Schwafe, and I work for the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm honored to welcome you to today's event, organized in partnership with Children's Rights and the National Homelessness Law Center. Today, we'll hear directly from youth advocates whose experiences reflect the impact of U.S. policies on young people through child welfare, immigration, education, housing, and more. So before we dive into our program, I just want to give a brief overview of the purpose of this event and the significance of the times that we're living in relation to the Universal Periodic Review. The Universal Periodic Review, also known as the UPR, was created by the UN General Assembly in 2006 to prompt, support, and expand the promotion and protection of human rights in every country. The first UPR review was in 2008, and the fourth cycle of the UPR began in November 2022, with the process happening about every 5 years or so. The UPR is a significant innovation of the United Nations Human Rights Council, which is based on equal treatment for all countries. It provides an opportunity for all UN member states to declare what actions they have taken to improve the human rights situations in their countries and to overcome challenges to the enjoyment of human rights. The UPR also includes a sharing of best human rights practices around the globe. So in February 2025, the Trump administration unfortunately withdrew from the UN Human Rights Council for the second time. Despite its withdrawal from the UN Human Rights Council during the first Trump administration, the US participated in the third cycle of the UPR. However, currently, the US has opted out participating in the current cycle of the UPR by not submitting its National Human Rights Report by the August 4th, 2025 deadline. So as a response to this, civil society, as well as local and state officials, have come together to condemn the lack of US involvement in the UPR. In addition, this event, among many others this week and throughout the rest of the year, and even leading to next year, highlight the various individuals and organizations speaking up about the negative impact of current US policies, especially in a time we plainly see the atrocities enforced by the current government. Within our discussion today, we'll be focusing on the impact of US policies on youth in the US who are harmed by school punishment, housing insecurity, immigration enforcement, incarceration, family separation, and institutionalization. Our youth experts here will connect their lived experiences to racial and economic inequities, criminalization, and violations of international human rights standards. The conversation will illustrate how US policies, for example, zero tolerance discipline and expanded immigration detention, cause lasting harm and reinforce racial disparities. Speakers will call for an end to discriminatory and punitive practices for support rights-based reforms driven by youth-led advocacy. So during this very important and crucial discussion, we ask you to listen and learn from our lived experts. So at the end of the discussion, we'll have a Q&A, and during the time of us talking, right, we'll have some note cards being passed around if anyone has any questions during our session. And for those who are online as well, there's a Q&A function right in the Zoom box, so someone will be monitoring. You can ask your questions there. Unfortunately, being able to get to all the questions, but hopefully we'll have a lot of your questions answered, and we hope at the end too, it'll be a lively discussion as well. So let's hear from our organizational partners and youth experts. So I want to introduce Josiah. Do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Josiah Gilbert, and I'm a youth advocate. And I serve as a member on the Are You Listening committee that's supported by Children's Rights. And one of our main goals is to end congregate care in New York State. And so I've lived through the child welfare system and other institutions that really do more harm for our young people and families than good. And so I'm here today really because our young people, our lived experts, really deserve a seat at the table, and we need to be heard because we know exactly what services, we know exactly what we need and what support systems in place that we need to help families thrive and help young people thrive. And so, it's about time that we hold the U.S. accountable and, we get some leverage in this these high stakes situations that are actually impacting our communities and our families and our homes. And also, one of the things I'll be talking about today is that, we have to get away, especially in the child welfare system, from this idea of family policing and how we solve that problem is really by providing genuine assistance and really good support systems that give families structure, but assistance that they need so that they can be self-sufficient and rely on themselves instead of government intervention. Okay. And I'll pass it to Hannah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Hannah. I work at Children's Rights. And I think it's always important for us to come together, like Josiah mentioned, to ensure that the U.S. is being held accountable. But I think in light of all that's happening now, our young people are under attack, our families are under attack, our communities are under attack. And so I'm here because I believe it's even more important now for us to build a record to show how the U.S. is falling short of its human rights obligations and to uplift the lived experts that are doing the work, that are calling out those harms and ensuring that those voices are heard. Thank you so much. I'll pass it over to Dominique.
Hi everyone, my name is Dominique. I use they, them. I'm a queer asylum seeker from Russia. I do not identify as Russian due to many reasons, but I decided to bring this up because even though it may look like that all immigrants, depending on their status, are treated the same regardless of where they're from, but it's obviously not the case. I have experienced gender-based violence, which is why I'm in the US, where I also experienced domestic violence, which forced me into youth, queer youth homelessness system. And after I had to exit that system on my own without any assistance from the system, I have been advocating for queer undocumented youth on state, city, and national platforms. And I have experienced challenges there, but I always try to bring up inequity in experiences that homeless youth face based on their immigration status, because the paid advocate spaces are dominated by US citizen youth who have no idea what experiences the people on the same boat with them face if they have an additional complication, which is an immigration status, which is not US citizenship immigration status. Any other immigration status adds additional complications to the experience.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sia Hegde. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a lawyer with the National Homelessness Law Center, one of the co-sponsoring organizations for this event. And I live here in New York City. Prior to my current work, which focuses predominantly on the criminalization of poverty and homelessness, and the advancement of social, economic, cultural rights like the right to housing. My background was as a public defender in the Bronx. And it really opened my eyes to the system challenges, the multi-system challenges that maybe in the US we deem civil rights violations, constitutional rights violations, but more broadly really are human rights violations, and are happening at all scales of governmental negligence and lack of oversight. So when we talk about, I think, the human rights accountability system of the US government, it really is a mandate for every scale of local, state, municipal power to also take on that responsibility. So it's really important and inspiring to be here with folks. I know we have a lot over the next few days, a marathon of other UPR related events. And so I come here from the perspective of, yes, a of a human rights lawyer, but more broadly, I think impacted by the way that all of these interconnected manifestations of the criminal legal system are criminalizing, erasing people's existence from the public eye in a way that is cruel and certainly not unusual punishment. It is the way the system is designed. So thank you. I'll pass it to Delvin.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Delvin Davis. I'm with the Southern Poverty Law Center. I am the interim policy research director at SPLC, and I'm here with my friends Corey Jones Sr. and Corey Jones Jr., aka CJ. They're both from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I met them about a year ago while I was doing research called the Only Young Once reports. Only Young Once is a 5-part series looking at youth incarceration and school dismissal pipeline across the Deep South, where we work at SPLC. Some things about the school prison pipeline. One is very expensive, in the sense that it's correlated with youth incarceration. And once someone is in the incarceration system, it costs usually 6 figures to close to $200,000, depending on what state you're talking about, to keep one youth incarcerated in a detention facility. In addition to that, once a person is incarcerated, there's a high recidivism rate. So there's that revolving door that keeps them in the system that has proven to have a lot of harms, whether it's physical or sexual violence, divorcing them from their educational system, a lot of things like that that are doing a lot more harm than good. And also it's very highly correlated to Black and brown. So for Alabama, where CJ is from, at the time we were doing the report, it was one Black kid every 15 minutes was getting suspended from Alabama public school, which is insanely high rate. I think Alabama was number 6 all time for all 50 states as far as their suspension and expulsion rates at the time. So, so with that said, we're blessed to have CJ here to talk about his story, being suspended from an Alabama school, and I'll just let him talk about his story because it's very powerful.
My name is CJ. So basically my story, I was in school basically getting help from math class, and I went to TCTA, like a career trade school or whatever the case may be. So on our way there, going one of the store, going there, we got the it was the resource officer and assistant principal outside, and they was watching us, but as we walked in, they stated that they smelled weed or whatever the case may be. So they grabbed a couple of the guys that was in the car, it was 5 of us. They grabbed 2 of them, and the 2 that was against the wall, that was like a family friend to me. So I did like this, asking them was they okay, and they was like, yes. So I went to class, I got to class, and probably before the bell even ring, the assistant principal came and got me, and he was like that I gotta go to the office because they gotta talk to me. So I went to the office. Next thing you know, the resource officer, he was like, I can go back to class because he ain't stopped me. But the assistant principal was like, I'm in it now because I was with them or whatever the case may be. So then shot on down the line, go back to school. I was in ISI for like 60 days. I had when I was learning, I had like an IEP. So I had to be pulled into small groups and stuff like that, but I ain't getting no help or nothing. So that basically, my story. It was hard and tough, to this day when I think about it, like like my voice going in and not, like, it's hard and tough, but I'd be all right. So that's basically my story.
Thank you for sharing your story, because it's I remember you telling on the cross about it where you had baseball scouts looking at you, and that kind of fell through, and it really affected your long-term future. And this is, you're one case of many cases across Alabama and across the South where Black and brown youth are caught up in this school to prison pipeline. Luckily, you didn't get into the incarceration system. That's where your father comes in, kind of intervening for you in that regard. But your story is powerful, so I think you should. So I think we transition back to you.
Mr. Corey, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
I can. Hello, my name is Corey Senior. I'm Corey Jones Senior. I gotta say something. By listening to this right here, it brings back memories. And it's personal. Really personal. Give me a second, y'all. Cause I saw what the system could do to your child. Now I'm here to share my child with everybody else. That child is being affected by this in the state of Alabama. Is it a concern? Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, it is. I'm just going back, reliving the memories of what we had to go through and what happened and how they want to take my son's life to fulfill a prison. What am I saying? The prison got to have residents. My son was no exception to it. They was going to do what they had to do to get there. But I'd be damned if that was going to happen on my watch. And I stand by that.
Thank you so much. I know this was just a kind of quick introduction, but you heard a tidbit of all the things we'll be discussing today. And to kind of kick off like the first part of our discussion, I'm going to pass it to Josiah and Hina, talking about the various harms within the various systems that we just briefly talked about.
So much. Thank you, Mr. Corey, for sharing that. And I think, in the line of, there are systems and not on your watch. And I just want to take a second to really sit with that because I think that was really powerful. And we're all lucky here to have you here, but especially your son to have you as an advocate and for sharing this. Thank you. In that theme, in terms of institutions that are there that are causing harm, I'm really honored to be here with Josiah to talk through, the harms of the family policing system, yet another system that needs residents, right? That needs bodies and needs young people, and how we have to fight so hard against that and ensure that families are supported in staying together. And so to kick off our conversation, I want to talk to you a little bit, Josiah, around the family policing system. The reason it's called that is because many advocates talk about the surveillance, the policing, the regulation, similar to what is in the criminal legal system. And so you engage in a lot of advocacy rooted in your own experiences and the harm that you've experienced. I'd love to turn it over to you to share a little bit of what your family has experienced and how that informs your work.
Sure. So, for me, this advocacy journey really, it hits home, and for many of us on the panel as well, because for me personally, as I endured the child welfare system and foster care system, as a youth, my mom really struggled with mental illness, and so eventually that led to my removal. But not only did she struggle with that, she also struggled with housing, job stability, economic issues as well. And so, what my family needed wasn't for me to be removed from my home and taken to other places, but really what we needed was support. So what we needed was things like therapy, things like, housing support, housing vouchers, consistent mental health care. And so instead, what we got was, caseworkers doing surveillance. We got government intervention. So, we got social services prying into, our family and our livelihood. And, what they did wasn't help us. They said that they were helping, but, ultimately they just caused more harm. It led to things like family separation. It led to things like, failed reunification process. And so, often what these social services do, unfortunately, often what they do is it leads us to over surveillance, and it leads us to consequences that really, destroy us and destroy our young people. And it's very invasive, and it often just passes judgment on families instead of providing, real services that can help us. And so because of that, the child welfare system has really failed me and many others.
Thank you so much, Josiah. I want to talk a little bit in your introduction. You talked about, the work that you do as part of the Are You Listening Collaborative. And so the Are You Listening report was a report that came out that really documented the harms in institutions across New York. And brave young people that had experienced those harms firsthand informed the findings of that report, which talked about the over-medication, talked about the disconnection from family, from community. And through that report and the work that came after, an incredibly powerful group of young people came together, including you, Josiah, to form the Are You Listening Collaborative that does the hard work of educating people of those harms. So having experienced those harms themselves, talking about it and raising the alarm on why this is so harmful, the millions of dollars that go into funding institutions instead of supports, and educating legislators to push for change. And so I know for you, Josiah, the work that you do as part of that Are You Listening Collaborative, which is incredibly powerful and impactful, is rooted in the harms that you experienced as being, thrust into an institution instead of your family receiving the support that they needed. So I'd love if you could share a little bit about the work that you do as part of that collaborative and how your own experience, lived experience, really informed that advocacy and adds power to the aspect that you're making.
Yeah, when I was 14, I arrived, I was taken from my home and I arrived at the facility in New York called the Children's Center. And essentially what the Children's Center does is it essentially warehouses children. It's supposed to be a last resort, but often we find through research and talking to families that often is used as the first option instead, which is a horrible thing because in these congregate settings, which is what, my campaign, Are You Listening? What our campaign does, we talk to legislators and also try to inform the public about these issues because in these settings, young people are really suffering. Young people are suffering with, mental health issues. They're suffering from loneliness. They're suffering from abuse in these settings. Often they're dealing with untrained staff that aren't really there to help them. Often they're very, it's a very carceral jail-like environment where they're told when to eat, they're told when to use the bathroom. Often their education is sacrificed. You have 13-year-olds getting the same education as say like a 17-year-old. And so in that picture, someone's falling behind. And so these settings, often there's fights and there's bullying. Sometimes youth often run away. And so now they're homeless. Now they're in the street. Now they're riding the subway, the train station. They're putting themselves in very bad, vulnerable situations to avoid these settings that were meant to help and stabilize them, but actually do the opposite. And so why are we tearing, children away from families to put them in a congregate facility that's actually not benefiting them when, all we need is better community support systems. And, we need to strengthen families that, just to provide support for families where children are actually loved. And often we noticed a trend, and one of the trends is that often poverty is confused for neglect. And so often families, this is how the over surveillance starts. And also system really doesn't treat all kids the same. We know that Black youth are actually more likely to be placed in these environments, and they're more likely to be surveilled or for a social services case to start than counterparts. And additionally, also LGBTQ plus youth actually face higher institutional rates. And so, as we talk about this, we can all understand or all agree that these are clear human rights violations, right? So this is a human issue. This is a family issue. This is a people issue that's, harmfully, negatively impacting youth and families.
Thank you so much, Josiah. For connecting that, for really calling out the racism that is in this system and all of the systems that we're talking about today. As we talk through the intersectional ways where these systems come together to harm people, harm families, harm communities, disproportionately harming Black families. And, you mentioned confusing poverty with neglect. I think we have to call it out what it is. It's intentional. There is no confusion. That is the intent. There is a deliberate encoding of poverty in the definition of neglect. to punish, to harm, to surveil families, disproportionately Black families, and those systems are acting as they intended to do. Harming Black families, separating Black families, and those harms have to be called out. And so thank you for raising the alarm on that and for your work. As we continue to talk about the intersectional ways these systems harm families and harm young people, I'm gonna pass it over to Sia and Dubnik to talk about housing and other systems that come together.
Was very powerful and a good level setting, I think, for how every issue that I think will be talked about today touches and is implicated by what happens when families are separated, and communities are the integral sort of fabric of dignity the community relies on to thrive is broken. So again, thank you all for being here, and the segment of the conversation that Dubnik and I are paired off to discuss, we'll talk about their experiences navigating the intergenerational, I think, trauma of what homelessness does to, again, communities, to young people who experience that. The impact of housing instability more broadly on the ways that other system consequences then trickle down. Dubnik sharing their identity as a queer identifying person, and the immigration consequences of, again, surveillance and other modes of punishment that came when they were just 20 years old, came to the US at 20. So I won't maybe speak for that experience for you. I would love to share more about that Dubnik with the audience, but wanted to maybe ground the first question around UPR, because I think, as Hadia did a really great job introducing with UPR, we're now a fourth cycle of several, I would say, opportunities for the US government to set a model example to the rest of the world. And again, I don't mean to speak from a more kind of exceptionalist mentality and attitude to say that, we are putting the sorts of priorities and the commitments of our government above other governments, but at the very least, it is our civil society obligation to ensure that the recommendations that were issued in prior cycles are lived up to. And so you need to kind of ground this first question, and to others, countries like Thailand, Azerbaijan, El Salvador that reviewed the United States during the last UPR session, that was in 2020, urged our government to increase protections for migrants and asylum seekers by ensuring them access to basic services. Based on your experiences, how would you describe our current immigration system's punitive effects on immigrant youth? One question. And what were the biggest challenges that you personally faced navigating the immigration system in New York State? I think Josiah did a great job of laying out some of the social service detriments and the implications of going through the bureaucratic hurdles of accessing basic resources from those services, but immigration has a big touch.
So the social service providers are putting all youth through same benefit pipeline, assuming they're all documented and they qualify for the same things, right? The point was brought up about everyone being put through the same educational programs regardless of their preparedness. But at the same time, those educational programs are very basic and do not really prepare you to survival. They don't make them ready to exit homelessness and actually, right, as they said, the social workers and the whole system is doing more harm than good because they make homelessness experience, which is already very stressful, right? There is no certainty in your future. There is no financial stability. So they make your life even more unbearable. They don't respect your privacy, they don't respect your they don't respect your independence. They surveil you. They don't let you leave the facility after curfew, and you are always under danger of losing your bed because you don't perform a forced labor they enforce in those shelters, which they have so many staff, more staff than youth. So those staff, I mean, even though they're underpaid and overworked, they basically have job because we don't have job. Because we are their bread and butter. And if we weren't homeless, they wouldn't be here. So there's that. I mean, it affects anyone regardless of immigration status, but US citizen youth at least have some opportunity, right, to exit that. And I think they are not motivated enough by staff to exit that the system. So they simply grow up, become older and age out of those systems. And they are moved into worse facilities where there is more violence, more discrimination, and where they mix queer and non-queer populations, and of course, queer populations who are more disproportionately affected by homelessness are more likely to experience gender-based violence because it's a highly stressed environment, it's a congregate environment. And yes, so what I would also want to mention is that yes, the US is an extremely expensive and affordable country with job crisis right now, and it's always been this way. It's just right now, media coverage is giving it attention, and all of a sudden, US citizen advocate speaking for immigrants while this discrimination based on paperwork was going on for years. Right, like now Trump decided to try to strike birthright citizenship, right? But at the same time, I think it's his administration stopped accepting new DACA recipients. What about those people, right? So there is clear focus on, I would say, straight immigrants, because who does it affect the most? It's the straight individuals who can have their own biological children, and then there is a slight possibility for them to immigrate through those children once they turn 21, which wouldn't be the case for queer couples who are undocumented. They cannot even adopt a child. So that's, that could be a failure of those parents, and they can sort this out. But what about the youth who were brought here by their undocumented parents and then without their consent? So that's my main issue. And they are not protected by the government from deportation. So there are so many changes. It's such a volatile legal field, immigration field, where the government changes rules on the fly, and for example, new rules for asylum seekers, right? It's an international obligation of the US to provide safety for anyone seeking protection for their life from the governments of the countries of origin of those people. And now, regardless of when you filed, regardless of how long your case is pending, right? My case is pending, so I didn't sign up for it. And now I and new applicants, we all have to pay annual fee to keep our case alive, which is delayed thanks to the government. So we pay for government failures. Additionally, they have increased, right, work permit fees, right? Something that helps us survive while we are waiting for our cases to be heard. They already were very expensive, right? That's something that US citizens have, people, they don't have to worry about. They can just apply for a job. But we also have to keep our status active every 2 years, and government delays renewals of our work permits, which leaves us with a thin paper receipt saying the government is processing our case. Please accept this person for employment. I mean, it's really, it feels insecure because that also can affect our ability to get a driver's license because our immigrants are facing additional scrutiny. Um, so they, it's just unfair treatment to anyone who was born in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yes, and additional punishments immigrants face, especially in those environments when they have to survive, right? They cannot really perform a survival work, right? As many youth in shelters do, because they also face scrutiny, right? If they get caught, doing sex work or other things, they can lose any chance of naturalizing or even get deported. So that's like additional underprivileged position they are put in. They, even if they get convicted, then they are by some chance of some crime, right? That they get convicted and they don't get deported, they don't get picked up after release from jail right away. They face a risk of being picked up by ICE at a reintegration center where people are going to reintegrate into society after justice involvement. They don't have that privilege. They don't have privilege of rehabilitation. They don't have privilege of most of the times to disclose that they have substance use problem. Why would they have substance use problem? Because they probably are always living in a fear of deportation, and it's really tough. Because if they disclose that they have a substance use problem, then they might lose again ability to naturalize.
I don't know if we have time for another question this round, but that was really quite comprehensive. I think touched on a central theme that I'm hearing reinforced around the pitting of vulnerable groups against one another by the ways that our government subjugates and takes away, suspends rights. And it, certainly fuels, I think, the weaponization of the folks that, just like you, and, that you have talked about from your own experiences, you yourself identify as, don't have that additional social protection and capacity to seek representation, to seek, even just to evoke their right to free speech, to speak for themselves, to act in the ways that they choose to access those services. So it's a really good point. And I think the framing that I'll also just add to the question around the intersections of homelessness, housing, stability, lack of welfare support. For some context for the audience, in 2023, the UN Human Rights Committee, which is the body of experts of the UN that oversees the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, took grave concern with the disproportionate impact of homelessness on people who are marginalized based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Incidents of harassment and social stigmatization not only violate the fundamental protections of equality and non-discrimination, which we've also heard reflected in both Josiah and Judni's testimonies, but they're also violations of the right to life, the prohibition against cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment under multiple international frameworks. So it really does speak to a much wider set of issues. So I don't know, if you want to maybe share a minute or so of how your experience, typically as a queer identifying person, reflects the scope of these concerns. I touched on this a little bit, but share.
I mean, what I can share is so I don't think there is a lot of true appreciation of lived expertise by a very nonprofit that serve youth who went through homelessness because I am an outlier. I had to be very resourceful. I had to exit homelessness on my own without any assistance of social workers who, again, as I said, they will put you through the benefit pipeline and you're waiting for a decision on your application and only to find out you're not eligible for it. And then you age out in the adult system and you are not no longer on a caseload of that the social worker, so the care. There is no follow-up and continuum of care. So I can touch on that later, but I already have created a nonprofit. I'm building a nonprofit myself. It's an app that helps youth specifically educate themselves on financial future, on their financial future, because that is one of the parts of safety planning, on how you exit homelessness, on how you exit a domestic a violent situation. That is not really part of education I've seen in a social service sector. So I'm trying to partner with a nonprofit that's formerly even served me. I've been their direct client, and there is no communication from them, even though I have internal contacts and hitting. And I think it's really telling. They would rather go to some evil corporation that sells your financial data that is established than to a prime example of a person who's been in their care and achieved something. So that's really telling.
Great. We'll be passing it to Delvin and James for.
All right, so as we're transitioning, talking about solutions to many of the problems that we've been talking about today, in Alabama, since last year, since CJ's incident with school suspension, we were able to advocate for a bill to pass in Alabama, House Bill 188, which is something that is intended to kind of disrupt the school business pipeline. Before House Bill 188 was passed, every school system had their own arbitrary way of doing school suspension and expulsion. Kind of like a Wild West way of doing things. Everybody can basically do what they wanted to do. And we ended up with a lot of different varying ways of arbitrarily kicking Black and brown kids out of school. There wasn't any kind of statewide standard, which House Bill 188 accomplished for us. That statewide standard would allow for due process. So if a kid is ready to be kicked out of school, there's a way for a kid to tell their side of the story, to bring evidence, to bring advocates to speak for them on their behalf. All are protections against arbitrary school suspensions. But before we were able to advocate for that, TJ's dad was in a much different environment. So I wanted him to kind of tell his story about how he had to kind of navigate through this system, and also kind of naming that there's a saying that kosher eats policy for breakfast. Even though we have this bill that's on the books, enforcing that, making people actually do it is also a hurdle in and of itself. Before I pass the mic to Mr. Jones, I do want to first thank him. One Black father to another. We both have kids that are in this system in the South. It's almost designed to dispose of them. And I think about your example a lot, about how you advocated for your son. My kids are a little bit younger than CJ's. They're middle school, high school age, but I think about how I am, raising them and the interventions that we have to have for our Black kids in order for them to stop. So thank you for saying that example, and yeah, I'll try not to be too emotional because I don't have any Kleenex on me. But I think that.
Please don't do that. Don't do that. The reason I say it, because there's still work to be done. I'm just a regular father, regular old Joe, but I'm old Corey. In that process of navigating for my son, you got to look at what was the reason why was I navigating for my son. First of all, let's clear this up. If he was in the wrong, he was going to have to pay. Not by the school, by me. So just be thankful that he wasn't in the wrong. And I give him thanks for his foundation to stand on what he believed in. He stayed with the truth. And I got I'm gonna go back to the navigation. But at the time, when I took him out of school, I did not have a plan. I didn't have a plan. I prayed, I kicked, I cried, I did everything that you wouldn't see a man normally do, but I did it. So at the time, like I said, I had no plan whatsoever, but I know my son was not going to alternative school. If he didn't do it, and then as that went on, the administration started lying to me, the city board started lying to me. Why would they lie? I have no earthly idea. But I knew the reason, because now a man was coming versus the mom. Moms always go. Now if that dad get up and go, it's a different story. It's a different fight. It's a different, oh, okay, we'll push it off. No, you're not gonna push this off. Let's talk. So when we had the conversation from navigating from the boards, the Tulsa City School board members, the administration and all that, they came up with different ideas, different stories. They gave me a door. Go check that door. Once I open that door, nothing there. Go over here and check that door. Nothing there. So wait a minute, I'm navigating, nobody helping me. I want to at least get the truth. Show me some film on my son doing something. Show me what you had to say. But what really threw me off at that incident was it was 5 kids in the car. 2 kids that they stopped. My son stopped and asked for the other kids, all right. But somehow they came back to get all the kids except 2 of them. 3 of them was involved, 3 that they got. And my question was, why did they do that? So I asked my son on numerous occasions, hey man, let's go ahead and break this thing off. If you did it, let's talk. Dad, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So we went on it. So my navigation started again, like I say, it was with the City Board of Education. I went with the school. Let's go with the school. Went with the school. Nobody had an answer. But this is what he did. Mr. Jones, this is what he's gonna have to take. Is there any evidence? No, we don't have any evidence. So as it started to navigate a little bit more, went to the board member. Nobody wanted to talk to him. Couldn't even get on the board to sit and talk to anyone. Nobody wanted to talk to him. Not even the representative from our district. He gave me his number, but he never wanted to talk to him. So we went on, so we started to we got a lawyer. As we got the lawyer couldn't even come. They put the lawyer out of the meeting. So I'm not right. So we went on to the, what we went back to, we had an IEP meeting, But somehow at the IEP meeting, while I'm sitting in the office, they had already written on the paper, he's going to alternative school. It was already premeditated before we even had a meeting. So I get in and ask, so what's going on? This is already premeditated. Well, the disciplinary board already said this right here, so you have to take this right here and go with it. Not gonna do that. So the navigation been tough. It's been treacherous, even with lawyers, even Bill. Now with the last stop was we were going to court, and from the court, we had to send something to the Alabama Attorney General. That was last year in September. We just got something back, what, a month ago. So I don't, like I said, the system in Alabama is real bad. The navigation system is also bad. You're like a ping pong. They're throwing you here, throwing you there. And the thing I did, I realized out of that, nobody wants to take accountability. They will give you somebody that don't even exist in the next door that I was telling you they're open and there's nobody there. And that's one of the things that's very hurtful because it's personal to me because that was my son. Very personal. And if he would stand and said, hey, they don't look at the harm that it caused him, the depression, the anxiety, the not trusting. Or even as a father, he looked at me like, man, I don't know what you're gonna do now, And I'm fighting like, you know what, to keep everything afloat. But if you go back to it, I never had a plan. Never had a plan when I took my son out. But I did take him out and we homeschooled. He only went to homeschooling for a month, if that, because he already has his credentials to graduate. And they was gonna stop that. No graduation, no prom, no baseball ceremony to finish his last term in school. So I get a little bit emotional, I get a little bit tied up with this right here. It's very hurtful. If anybody you can't understand the pain I have within inside. But you can see it sometimes with my frustration, the way I talk. But just imagine this mom. My job is to protect the whole nest and the circle. And I'm gonna do that.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the alternative school, and your intervention kept TJ from having to go to an alternative school. I remember, I'm North Carolina, so it's different state, but similar situation. The alternative schools are basically, the entryway to the school to prison pipelines. It's forcing them from traditional schools. They're not kept up with their classmates. It's a different system. And I think you knew, even like seeing people that have gone to alternative schools when you were in the same school system as a teenager. I don't know how far back in the day it was, decades ago, but things haven't changed since then. It's the same here in North Carolina, it's the same in other states, it's the same here in New York. Alternative schools have that correlation with dropout rates have correlations with incarceration. Incarceration have, even if you're able to get out of the system as a youth, there's that recidivism rate that maybe 5-10 years as an adult, you're coming back into the system, being rearrested as an adult. So having that intervention early, it's like catching cancer. The earlier you catch it, the better you are in surviving it. I think that was very, very instrumental. So I think I was supposed to transition back to.
Before we play transition, CJ, is there anything that you want to add to like the story or hearing from your father's perspective about everything that happened?
It's kind of like what my dad said, but to sum it up, like for me as the son, when that happened to me, I was lost in my own mind or whatnot. And since I was hurt, I always used to go to my dad and ask my dad, was it okay for me to hurt other people? Not in the how it may sound, but that's how it was at the time, Then like my dad said, imagine how we feel, me as a man, not my dad as a man, but my mom, seeing my mom hurt, that made me hurt, Then with the baseball, star player, could have went somewhere. And it's crazy because I always used to tell my dad if I get drafted, I either want to go to Atlanta or New York. So that's really it.
I have some audio that I want to share, but before I get to that, I just want to, first of all, thank you all for sharing your experiences and your stories. I know this is not easy. I know it's probably uncomfortable in a lot of ways. I know it's probably bring up a lot of different emotions, but I really want to thank you for allowing us the opportunity to sit here and listen and learn from you all. So I just want to take that moment to say thank you. Now we have a piece of audio that I want to share. And we have this audio from someone who chose to be anonymous due to the current climate around immigration in the US. That'll be a couple of minutes.
I was born in the States from South America when I was 10 years old. I've been raised by my aunt, the mother to me. When I arrived, I reunited with my parents and my two brothers I never met before. My brothers had grown up differently. I didn't speak the same language, didn't understand the culture. I felt like a stranger in my own family. My parents were trying their best, but they didn't know how to support me. They came from a background where mental health wasn't really talked about. So when I experienced depression, they didn't really understand what I was going through. At 11, I tried to take my own life. I was hospitalized and they put me on medication, and nothing changed at home. Every time I needed help, bills would just pile up. And as a non-committed child, I didn't have the proper health insurance. So that made things only harder on all of us. Eventually, the child welfare system got involved. I told my parents that we placed somewhere for 2 months until things calmed down. That turned into years. And my first residential treatment center, I felt like I entered a jail. I was 12, surrounded by strangers, and just constantly reminded that I didn't belong. My ex had made me a target for bullying. You could call me Mexico or immigrant. No one understood my culture or what I really needed. Through those 9 years, my mental health declined. I hurt myself. I tried to end my life multiple times. And instead of being treated with care, I was labeled a problem kid, over-medicated and silenced. No one took the time to understand the real problem. When I was 13, the system outed me to my parents. They didn't know how to respond. There was no help on understanding what it meant to be LGBTQ, how to support me in that way. There was no language for our experience. No one translating the struggles between culture, identity, and survival. Afterwards, I would just move through foster homes and institutions. It just made things worse. Through my mother immigration case, with help from a local nonprofit organization, I was able to obtain my work permit at 18. Looking back, what my family needed wasn't punishment or separation. It was understanding. My parents needed support to learn about mental health and identity in a language they could connect with. I came to this country believing that I'd meet my family, but instead I was placed into a system in the child welfare that failed me to protect me and ignore my humanity. The system that became my guardian allowed my immigration status to remain a barrier. It still does for thousands of young people today. 80% of you who leave the foster care with a mental health diagnosis, not because they were born with one, but because of the trauma they experienced in the system. And Black and brown families and those with limited resources face this harms at highest rate again and again. So what do we need? For LGBTQ youth like me, when our homes aren't affirming, we need family-centered, culturally sensitive support, not separation. For families like mine struggling with limited resources, we need help, concrete support to strengthen families, not systems that police, punish, and divide us.
I think what's listening to this audio, and I don't know if anyone has anything they want to add from what they've heard from it, but listening to this audio and then also listening to all of our panelists today, I noticed the underlying theme is the system is broken, right? Ideally, we have all these systems in place to help one another, right? To thrive, to survive, right? To have the basic necessities, right? To live, right? Food, shelter, right? Education, these are all basic human rights, right? In my opinion, I'm sure my panelists, my colleagues here can agree, but I noticed that the system doesn't support that, even though that's there in place. And that's something that's really, really frustrating. I hear that as I listen to this audio. But before we kind of go to our next segment, talking about solutions, I want to know if anyone here had anything they want to add from this audio, anything that spoke to them, and if not, that's totally okay.
No, I was, the case with Alabama schools reminded me of Russia. So Russia has a much worse track record for human rights. And I faced same expulsions and suspensions for 7 times over my school career. Not because I'm a different color, obviously, but because I'm queer, so it's a different discrimination. So it can be the same color, but just for being queer, you can be like discriminated against and not protected. So it's failure to protect. So it's basically government persecution. So I would say the US is also persecuting people for many reasons. It's just not classified as a persecution.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I also think what spoke to me from the audio, when we're talking about rights-based language, is that the very central notion that we all have a right to also stay and remain and to return to where we want to return to. And that the US has, the government has consistently offshored and outsourced, basic services. And when I'm hearing Duke also share about their experience navigating the nonprofit system and the nonprofit industrial complex as another sort of, capitalistic, scheme of perpetuating these harms and basically continuing a cycle of where are people supposed to go? Where are people supposed to choose to go when if those choices are also taken, but also the services, the wraparound services that they should be offered as basic protections are not there. So I'm just hearing a lot of these themes as well. And yes, it's very uncomfortably, but glad to talk about it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, those, words from our anonymous speaker were, really moving and impactful and just hearing all this, other testimony as well. It really shows us that, there's damage to our young people, and there's damage, to our families, whether, it be the immigration system, whether it be the school to prison, pipeline that's really strong and something, we need to stop because it's really important that we prioritize education for our young people, because that's a road to economic stability. And so, that's something that we really have to work on. And then also the family policing system as well. And all these issues are generational. They're touching generations. And so, the US and us here, we all have a responsibility to improve these systems and provide real solutions.
So we are going to try to keep this next section a little bit shorter, but I want to give an opportunity to provide solutions. Now, in everyone's testimonies, you all talk about here and there what solutions and things you want to see, but I do want to give an opportunity, if you wish to dive into what you want to see. I know something that we talked about is a lot of support. That's a big thing. It seems a lot to be putting bandages on issues that actually need a lot more work done on that. So I know Josiah just spoke. I'm going to pass it back to you. You want to elaborate on your solutions?
Sure. So for me, in my personal situation, I really believe that housing would have changed everything. And one of the things, when my family experienced homelessness, we didn't receive the support systems that we needed. We didn't receive housing vouchers or affordable housing. My mom didn't receive, job opportunities or programs that would have, helped stabilize her or mental health supports, so that she could have, entered the working class and then benefited from everything that comes from joining that working class. So, all of these, issues definitely correlate. And essentially I was removed from my house, again, because of this, this idea of neglect. But really it was a failure of systems that should have been in place that, the government says are in place, but are really not responsive to the needs of young people and the needs of families. And, just another thing, if someone would have asked me, when I was removed, if I had somewhere to go, I could have provided them with friends or family members that could have took me in last minute so that, I wouldn't have to go to a children's center or a congregate setting, where there's strangers and staff members and a very prison, like environment that's not, upbuilding or strengthening bonds, of children, but instead, that last resort was implemented. And so, I did have to endure the trauma of those congregate settings. But, I'm here today, and we're all here today because these are things that, we really care about and we're passionate about. And, we have to stand up for, support systems that can strengthen our future.
So Josiah, I think what I'm sitting with here is, there's been this institutionalization of racism and surveillance and harm. And this is not by accident, it's by design. And so the supports that are needed are going to be needed delinked from the surveillance system, delinked from these institutions. And those are concrete supports. Some of the progress that we're talking about or some of the ways that folks have been helped, it seems that it's been in spite of these institutions. CJ, you may not have made it to New York in a baseball scholarship, but you made it to New York. And we're across the street from the United Nations, and you are sitting here sharing your story, bringing that truth to power, and that's incredible. Dubnik, you're here sharing your story and talking about how all what you have overcome to be able to speak from a place of lived experience. And Josiah, not just in this room, the incredible advocacy that you engage in every day in many different spaces with folks that know and folks that don't know, with legislators. All of that is in spite of the harms and in spite of the runaround and the doors that nothing came through. It's in spite of that. And that's incredibly powerful and commendable. And you should have not had to go through any of that to get to here. But that's where we are today, for sure. And so for me, when I think about support, one of the things that Children's Rights does, and I'm incredibly privileged to be able to support, is our lived expert partnership. So when we work with young people in the Are You Listening Collaborative, it's really important for us that folks are compensated for their time, their expertise, and ensure that they are the ones that are taking the stage, that are informing policy changes, that are going to the legislators. And we are here as support. So you may notice that, in today's conversation, whether it's Delvin, Leocadia, myself, or Sia, we've tried to be intentional about not taking up too much space. And that's because that is one way that we can support and ensure that we step back to allow that space for that work. And so I'll turn it back over to Desire to talk about some of the concrete supports and work that you advocate for in terms of for young people, but also for families.
Yeah, one thing, obviously, we advocate for, that I advocate for, is, to stop family separation, stop the over surveillance of families and parents, and really get back to community programs, get back to services that genuinely benefit young people and families. And also another project that I've benefited from is a Children's Defense Project, which involved a pilot to policy program. Hopefully it can be implemented into policy in the future, but that project involved 100 young people that exited foster care that received $1,000 a month with no strings attached. And really, it's a pilot called Youth in Power. And so that guaranteed income, that $1,000 a month for a year, obviously it didn't change anything. It didn't change everything in this economy. $1,000 is not gonna, exactly change your life, but it can provide a huge support system to a young person, especially after they've exited care, where they're facing homelessness. Often a solution provided by the government is public housing. And public housing is not, it's not homelessness, but it's pretty close oftentimes. And oftentimes it's an unsafe environment. And oftentimes it keeps a young person in the same cycle that they're trying to get out of. And another thing, this project allowed me and others to focus on their education. So, for a brief moment in time, we were able to have an opportunity to focus on, something else that could actually benefit us and allow us to grow, whether it be academically, to grow financially. Also, the Youth in Power was able to provide me with mental health resources. So these are all the things that, happens when you invest in community, when you invest in young people and make a direct investment, because at the end of the day, young people know exactly what services and exactly what implements they need to better themselves.
On that note, we're going to pass it to Sia Dufy.
Thank you. So Judy, I know we've talked about solutions a lot on kind of two levels in our conversations. One has been the more system-wide solution, which is often a wraparound kind of, holistic map of a lot of different interventions. Let's say about housing, to advance the right to housing. It doesn't literally mean you just need to build more housing. It actually means the housing needs to be culturally adequate. The housing needs to be spatially desegregated. The housing needs to be, habitable and safe and secure, and meet the standards that oftentimes in this city, in this country, it beyond measure that we don't see. And then we also talked interventions on a personal level, and with regard to the app and the financial empowerment tool that you so innovatively designed as this nonprofit that you're working on leveraging more support for. And so I'm wondering if we could maybe frame this question from your perspective around kind of both of those avenues. Looking at the experience that you've dealt with, the experiences navigating immigration, surveillance, threats of deportation, of course, the homeless, youth segment, and thinking about what in New York State, maybe we think about this from the state perspective, because we're kind of grounded here, what does that look like to advance a right to housing for you based on your lived expertise, and talk to us about the app you're doing to,
Okay.
respond.
Great. Just in general, right? Immigration is a federal issue, and and everything I talked about, it should be just negated and that will be a solution. So like, we should not force people pay for ability to work. It makes no sense. They need work to survive. And then we are artificially preventing them from accessing benefits that they pay for through taxes. So it's extremely unfair, you know, it's a full-blown discrimination and, you know, it's just inhumane. So, but on a local level, of course, we just need more culturally trained caseworkers. They basically have, you know, non-required culturally competence trainings that can be skipped and attended next year. And then staff members coming in with no training, and then they just harm youth who are non-straight, and there is no even a conversation about immigration status differences and knowing what to do if the person is has a unique situation that is not solvable through simply applying for government assistance for them. So we do need to require case managers at least to have that knowledge. And yeah, I mean, it's just, in my opinion, I would call it war of attrition launched by the government on immigrants. They want them to not be able to legally work, but at the same time not be able to access benefits. So they would probably self-deport. That the expectation, I assume. And obviously it's not working. It's just forces people to enter and join criminalized economies, survival work, which puts them further in danger for immigration detention with no charge, with no limit of time they spend there, no bail available to them. And it's just unfair. It's basically additional, you know, punishment they face, you know, same punishment they serve as Americans who commit certain crimes or being accused of certain crimes, but in addition to that, they have a deportation looming over them. And yeah, that's why I've created my app, which is expanding into, you know, assistance with work applications, because now the current job market, it's really hard to invest so much time. Like searching for a job is another job, full-time job. So I've created like tools that help you at least clean your AI outputs and help you make sure your emails don't sound AI generated. Or I'm also working on simple one-click solution for you to generate customized resumes that are one page, which is not currently available by any tool. And my main platform I've created is a financial planning tool for people like myself, but it would serve anyone. So I'm planning on partnering with national and international nonprofits, because it could serve anyone who lives across countries or who has been deported or is stuck at the southern border, to log their income and expenses and analyze and predict their future net worth, future financial stability, future debt with their current behaviors, right? It's basically a financial therapist for youth to help them analyze and educate themselves on how to budget their $5 essentially. And maybe that could help them without any judgment, without any surveillance from the government, because currently we know that IRS, despite benefiting from millions of undocumented people, they decided to start sharing information with ICE. So, you know, currently it's already like a shaky situation for them to admit that they're undocumented and still pay taxes. you know, it can be dreadful for anyone who works under the table, not just undocumented people do that. So they can essentially share it on my tool, and not even admins can see what my users write there. They can annotate their transactions that would not be clear, otherwise it would be just a Venmo transfer, but what it is for. You don't want to share it with government or with a bank. You can do it on your spreadsheet, and it's completely edited and encrypted. Even if IRS or any other government entity subpoenas records from me, it would be an encrypted cipher string that can only be read with the user recovery phrase, which user may forget. So I would like to use this platform to be able to partner with any other youth-serving nonprofits who may listen to this recording or in person, because I think it's very useful to people like myself. I'm speaking of lived expertise. I would benefit from this tool and maybe have exited homelessness sooner. So it is spelled dubnik.org, which is D as David, O, P as boy, N as Nicholas, EEK.org. Thank you.
I think one of the takeaways from, as we're talking about solutions again, one of the things that I really hope to kind of drive the point home, there's a cultural dynamic here that we have with our kids, how we treat our kids, especially if they're anywhere on the margins, whether racially or their sexual orientation or whatever, what have you, how they identify. There's a quote that Trevor Douglas had, I have to paraphrase it, but he said it's easier to raise strong children than to fix broken men. So again, speaking to how can we see a kid in America and treat him or her or them as a kid, not as an adult, not as a criminal, but as a child that is worth investing in. That speaks to the value that we put into a young person that has a future, and we want to have that person have a productive future in society. But that's kind of hard to do when you're incarcerated, or you kicked out of school, or you're depending on resources that are in your school system, like an IEP plan or other resources, and separated from your community. So that they can get a community that is one real resources. That's one thing. But even if that community is well resourced, we have to keep that kid in that community. Otherwise, there's that separation of how does that kid get what they truly need. So so that's one of the main takeaways that I'm getting from all this. Now I do have, I guess, one question to kind of wrap up when we're talking about solutions with Chize and Corey Senior. I think about you all's experience, kind of looking back. If you had to, I guess, wave your magic wand and wish for one thing that would have made your situation better, what would that be?
If I had a magic wand, what would have made it better? I say this right here. I wouldn't want to wait. Because the reason I say it right there, look at where we're at now and the panel and the board member that we're here with to get other kids the opportunity to see what's going on, other parents to see what's going on. So I look at this story with me and my son, it's something that must have, should have, and it's here now. It's for us to, what are we gonna do? Now we're conscious of it. Once we become conscious of it, now what are we gonna do? And that's the most important thing. I don't want to wave a magic wand. I don't want to take nothing from him. Did it hurt him in a sense? Yes, it did. Guess what? He's going to be strong. He's going to maintain, and he's going to be that seed that I'm talking about. They're going to plant that seed in the ground. And sometimes you might not get to see the leaves on the tree, but I know it's there. So when the leaves come on that tree, who went off? It's always gonna be love. It's always gonna be economic. It's always gonna be help. Can you help someone? That's why I would not want to wait a woman. I would not want to let it disappear because there's a reason for the season that we're here. Appreciate you. Thank you.
I want to put you on the spot too, but yeah. You're a part of the story.
Um, Well, if I had a magic wand, oh, if I had a magic wand, I wish that at the time, the age I was, that adults would have listened to kids and not think that they automatically lied just because next adult say, well, he did this or did that. So,
Can I say something? I'm gonna say this right here. I never said it before. I want to thank my son because it's been a journey. He have kept me on my foundation, on my protective role. And I thank him for this right now. He just don't know what he's done for me. He don't know. To maintain his truth and his foundation has really pushed me. And I'm thankful for that.
Thank you, everyone, so much for sharing your solutions. So I'm glad we kind of went to more a positive note, which I know we really needed. And I know once again, we're running out of time, but I really do want to open it to folks. If you have any questions, I know some post-it notes were passed around. If not, I really want to give an opportunity for folks to ask questions. I think it's important. Anyone else have a question to ask? Let's ask this one. My glasses are terrible. Since the federal government is not, I'm sorry, I don't know what that word is. I'm Catholic.
Since the federal government is not receptive to engage in human rights right now, what advice do you have for how advocates can promote human rights change at the local and state level?
That's a good question.
Floor is yours. I would say voting in your local and state area where you're from, because that changes things. We look at the big federal thing, but if we go to our local and state, that's where it starts at. And sometimes we miss that part because we say, hey, I'm gonna jump on the big federal board. Better stay local and state.
Yeah, I would say, really starting from the ground up. And so, I think one thing, is youth leading, advocacy. And I think, this looks like, programs like, Are You Listening? Programs like Youth Empower, and many others, that really, lead the way and set a foundation, for these stories and, different, policies, or what we hope to implement, to be lifted up, right? And this, means talking to legislators. It means talking to your local legislators, right? Obviously, the federal government is not listening at this time, but, we could get an assembly member or a senator or the mayor or the governor or even your local community board, your local, school. It starts there, starts, in your own community. If you think about, even this nation was formed, a group of men that hated the British, right? So, if we come together, right, we can make a real difference. But, we have to be unified, and, we have to see the vision, and, we have to, not let, negative, effects, get the better of us.
Yeah, we always have to acknowledge that some of us can vote. And that's why we need immigrant voices in all those spaces, because they would, right now it's even scarier, right? Even for myself, a white, documented, currently individual, It is scary for me because, you know, people are getting detained for their free speech for Americans, but if you are an immigrant, like, you know, they're like complaining that Americans are being detained by ICE, but now they at least can feel what immigrants have felt for years, regardless of administration. So yeah, there's just a need of acknowledgement that policies we advocate for the most part, they wouldn't benefit everyone equally, and maybe some huge population like undocumented population at all. We need to educate citizen advocates on advocating for people who have no voice right now, for asylum, to always include them and acknowledge the limitations of their advocacy.
And to, I think, piggyback on that in a very maybe practical note in these maybe ways that civic engagement can help shape the conversation. Like, go to your city council people, go to your, you know, elected assembly members and senators and brief them on exactly what we're doing here, brief them on the scale of these violations and name them as rights-based violations. I think we don't do a good enough job in our maybe organizational cultures, in the ways that we talk to our neighbors or friends, in naming and calling out the mass atrocities as true violations. I think that language can actually be really powerful at shifting the cultural needle further and further left. So yeah, I would certainly start with all that. And also human rights commissions at the local levels, encourage them to continue enforcing, if they're not enforcing the sorts of challenges that are being left out of those sort of protections that they're like positioned to enforce the very important.
I think I just want to add is the power of intersectional organizing. As you heard today, no one system impacts just one person. All of these systems come together to act in racist and harmful ways. And so regardless of the federal administration, there's a lot of local power, and leveraging that and coming together and advocating at each level is very important.
Yes, I'm going to put Lavinia on the spot.
Oh,
And ask her to just say a word about work that we're doing with Human Rights City. Because speaking of state and local opportunities to lift up human rights, this is an opportunity.
yeah. So Human Rights Cities Alliance is an organization really with a bunch of folks in various human rights spaces, really trying to bring the concept of human rights into local cities and states. I know kind of in the US, right, human rights is kind of seen as like a foreign concept that like, oh, that's very far away. That's for like a totally different country, right? I think especially growing up here in the US, right, we're like, oh, we don't have human rights violations. That's not a thing. Clearly that's false. But the idea of Human Rights Cities Alliance is one, educate states and local cities officials, right, on like human rights, and there's human rights violations in the US, but also understanding that all of these mechanisms that we have, right, like UN, other international mechanisms, even though they're not perfect systems, they are systems that we can use here in the US to implement human rights policy locally and at the state level. And that's something that over broadly as Americans, we don't really have that like understanding, but that's something that's really important. So Human Rights Cities Alliance is really trying to do a lot of that work, and especially in light of the UPR and the US not participating in Human Rights Cities Alliance, and also other organizations, even like this event, tomorrow's the People's UPR, right, where we're going to hear about from 30 directly impacted folks about their experiences with human rights violations, right? There's all of these different opportunities to participate, right? But really bringing the state and local level, because something that we've talked about here, voting, right? Not just waiting for like the next presidential election, right? But look at your local like elections, right? We have midterms, I think that's next year, right? So that's like an opportunity, right? Really focusing on how we can bring the local level, because the way things are going now, we need more organizing, right, amongst ourselves and being community like here. So thank you all for being here. You're part of the solution, which is really great. Any other question? Any other questions? Oh, we got one thing. Yeah. I think we take one or two more. I know people are on a schedule, but what do we have?
Okay, the question is, can you speak more about helpful ways to build community? And not system-linked supports. You mentioned the need for the power of services that are deemed system and some are community. Can you share more about examples and ideas for supporting those resources? Ooh, let's take that on.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it stems from, reinvesting into local services and local communities. So I think, it involves, researching nonprofit organizations in your community or a neighboring community. Maybe you can volunteer at your local food pantry, right? Maybe you can tell someone else about a resource that you know about, right? And so, I think all of it also is about providing a platform because there's a lot of services that often are either underutilized or overutilized. And so I think, we have an obligation to, inform each other about resources that are available. And also, if we see something that is missing or something that we need, don't be afraid to start your own project. Don't be afraid to start your own organization. If someone is not listening, talk to someone else. And so I think just not taking no for an answer.
One last question.
Hello everyone, my name is Jennifer. Any assistance I can be. So I myself am a registered U.S. presidential candidate. I'm the new generation female leader, and I do community work in the state capitals of Albany and Connecticut. And I get invited to many congressional meetings where we discuss what you guys are asking to be heard here. And being here with you guys connects the dots because a lot of the views that you guys feel are not being heard, even though you guys are on the podium speaking to elected officials, we're still in the same spot sometimes. And I get to bring that down to you guys here. We can mediate conversations when the Senate Congress allows these conversations to be heard by the nonprofits, the community members, the small businesses, low income communities. I do a lot of work for these people that cannot be heard, guys. So what's the word? How serious is it for the Supreme Court to interfere with human rights violations if we see that other presidential candidate that's in power now is being stated by the federal Supreme Court to be actually endangering the lives of the children, and the United Nations is having meetings to discuss impeachment processes, which is taking more than a year. When do we interfere as adults to say no? It's 15 minutes. We've had enough. The children are being taken out of the schools without permission of the court systems. The immigrants are being touched without permission of their lawyers and the court's approval. And we have other presidential candidates are getting the same interview and they're being told the opposite. You're not allowed to do this thing. So it's a very sincere thing to say that sexism is real. The females get told, oh, if you're in this position, you are to respect every single human. And unfortunately, we see the male species do the opposite behavior. So where is the urgency that we need to override this impeachment process? We're delegating these conversations with me in Congress. So anything that I can help you with tonight and today, I'm here, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Well, we are going to wrap up. But before we do, I was kind of here jotting down some notes of various things that people said, right? And I have a lot, but I think the underlying thing that I really want to highlight is, I think the main thing is support, right? Community is really important, right? How can you work together? But really not just putting like a band-aid on all of the things and issues that we're talking about, really getting to like the root cause, right? We thought racial discrimination is a huge thing, right? Folks being part of the LGBTQ community, right? The discrimination you all face, right? That's something that's really huge as well. So really the takeaway from the conversation that I had is looking at like, okay, what are the solutions, right? How can we not put a bandage on all of this and what's the root cause? But I think the biggest takeaway is community and supporting one another and doing what we can. But does anyone have one last final reflection, call to action?
Yeah, just a couple key takeaways as we wrap up. Just from our perspective is really the idea of listening to lived experts and listening to our young people is really the start of real change. We're the ones being impacted, we're the ones being affected. And so, hearing our voice and trying to understand is huge. And then the other thing we have to understand is that institutions, they don't heal, they actually cause trauma. And so one of the things, we have to do is really do more to de-escalate institutions and not rely on government intervention. And so again, prioritizing our local, organizations, prioritizing community, and really leaning on each other instead of the federal government or instead of the government in general, so that we can really work to help each other.
I also think, and I say this as a lawyer, but recognizing that we're in a time of mass, sort of unconventional ways of thinking and how maybe movement work can be done better, and recognizing that, lawyers are not the heart of it. And I think, really working within these different sectors of our integral work, not just across different disciplines, but the skill sets of organizers, lived expertise, advocates, clinical faculty at schools that are teaching the next generation of folks to be doing this work thoughtfully and culturally, in a very culturally sensitive way. I think, really just reimagining the ways that we're even interrogating these questions and the interventions, because I'll say for myself, like, this was not something that I think even 7 or 8 years ago when I was in law school, I had much of a model understanding of, barring maybe 1 or 2 wonderful faculty that are still very, very passionately driven in the work. But I don't think I'm a sort of exception to that. I think that is the story of a lot of us that kind of pursue these tracks of again, civic support, of civil rights, social justice work, human rights work. And I think we just are at a time where we need to think broadly and differently and consistently and in ways that maybe before were not as demanding. So that's another takeaway.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, I was talking a lot about discrimination based on paperwork, and right now we have a racial oppression still, but it's like more subtle. Here it's a documented oppression, right? You don't have certain immigration clearance, you cannot have this job, or you cannot apply for this major in school because you are undocumented. You cannot get financial aid, but at the same time you cannot get tuition discount. So you are legally prevented from accessing things, and it's accepted, and it's okay. And right, people were saying we need to listen to youth. Obviously, it's not the case if you want to not just be tokenized and talk on a panel for an hour and then continue on your own. If you want to build something, you are not being partnered with because you're not taken seriously, right? As a founder of a growing nonprofit, it's a challenge to be taken serious by those same organizations that create conferences and technical assistance centers that quote unquote uplift youth voices. Yeah, right. When I was working for Runaway Homeless Youth Technical Assistance Center, right? It's a national organization. I was directly working with Youth Collaboratory, right? I was the only person who is a non-US citizen there, or I think, who was actively advocating for people like myself. And I was by funders, by government funders, I was silenced, I was prevented from providing technical assistance nationally to a nonprofit serving people like myself, right? You know, with all those obstacles, with all those odds against undocumented homeless youth, they are very likely to end up homeless with all those limitations and requirements. So they clearly are served by the nonprofits that they listen to those technical assistance recommendations. And I was just bluntly prevented from saying anything regarding on how to serve undocumented people. So that's very concerning and serious discrimination that people who are born in the wrong place basically face.
It's gonna be quick. It's gonna be quick.
Yeah.
My thing is, how do we change? We have to go back and change his story to our story. And once we do that right there, things will begin to change. Have we made strides over the years and over the decade? Yes, we have. But it's time for our story to be told versus his story.
Awesome. And I just want to thank, first of all of our panelists for sharing your stories today, solutions, key takeaways. Thank you so, so much. And thank you all for attending. So in front of SPLC, National Homeless Law Center for Children's Rights, we say thank you. So also there is more food in the back. Please take some home. And also you'll be getting email on different resources and things so they can take home with you. So yeah, thank you so much.